Hello everybody, I'm Emma Taylor. I'm one of the associates at the OT service, and I'm going to be talking to you today about grading bathroom activities to promote age-appropriate occupations with a specific focus on bathroom activities. So if we just look at the learning outcomes, the things that I'm going to talk about are looking at the link between developmental stages and occupation. So again, specifically around bathroom occupations and what would be the normal development activities that we would do at various stages. Think a little bit about what is age appropriate, what that means, and perhaps think about how that affects the sorts of things that we do, our recommendations, from various different perspectives, and talk a little bit about grading, different approaches that we might use with our clients to get the best outcomes for their occupational engagement. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And I just want to start off by, if you're not aware of it, just introducing you to a document that the Royal College of Occupational Therapists has produced in 2019 around the role of occupational therapists with children and younger people. Now, this is a broad document. It's not specifically related to bathroom toileting activities specifically, but I want to kind of relate it a little bit to sort of set the context. So the first aim of the document is to look at being able to support routines that promote physical and mental health into children's sort of daily routines and activities. And we know that toileting and basic hygiene is a fundamental and basic occupation. So it's really quite important that as occupational therapists, we are supporting children and young people in these activities. And particularly if perhaps personal care toileting is a challenge for young people, which might result in them not being able to wash properly. It might result in them having some perhaps continence issues. And we know that in other children can be quite cruel. If you've got a child in the classroom that smells, they might be avoided. So we really want to work on personal care and toilet hygiene practices to support our young people that we work with, so that they can be included in sort of regular activities. And the next point that the document makes is around developing partnerships between parents, teachers, and the wider community to address children's needs in education. And if we bring that back down to sort of toileting needs when they're in education, it's ensuring that educational facilities, schools, have got the appropriate facilities for children with additional needs, with developmental needs. And there's been a recent example in the news of a young girl in Belfast who has got brittle bone disease. She's a wheelchair user. She's the only wheelchair user in the school, and she's having to go to school in nappies because they don't have an accessible toilet. So it's working with education, perhaps not so much around education per se, but around meeting those very, very basic needs and supporting them in understanding how they can meet those needs. Also around being able to work across traditional service boundaries to address children's physical and mental health needs. So that could be as part of a multi-agency approach, or it could be working with other agencies. But certainly from my perspective, being able to work with perhaps a speech and language therapist to help communicate the child's needs in terms of what they need, being able to work with a physiotherapist to look at postural needs if we're looking at toileting, for example, or some of us are lucky enough to work with psychologists to help understand some of the emotional and psychological barriers to a child being able to deal with some of these specific occupations around toileting and personal care. And we always work towards a strength-based approach. So really looking at what can that child or young person actually do? What are their strengths as well as their impairments? And really looking to promote independence or occupational participation. I think we use this independent, the word independence a lot, but with a lot of our service users, it's not about being independent in the traditional sense, but it's being able to participate and engage in some of those occupations that are important to them. And also thinking about the changing needs of a child or a young person and their carers to facilitate positive transitions, working with children and young adults in those very formative years. They can change so much, so massively, that understanding what is needed at different developmental stages, but also moving on from childhood into adulthood as well, and making sure that those are positive transitions, and really thinking about what is age appropriate and how do we future proof for that. So it was really just to set the scene, if you like, before I start talking about bathroom activities per se. So bathroom activities do evolve as children grow and develop, and with different tasks becoming more relevant at different ages. And so I'm going to talk through a bit of an overview of what would be typical of a bathroom activity at the different developmental stages. And this kind of helps give us a framework for what is to be expected at certain ages. But obviously this is going to vary from child to child. Children, even if they've got sort of normal development, will master skills at different ages. Some will leave it very late, some will do it a lot sooner. So it's just thinking about how children would be expected to develop at certain ages. And I'm going to talk later as well about environmental influences on this. You know, obviously our development is very much based on other external factors as well. But just as a kind of a rule of thumb, at those very early infant stages, and I'm using age 0 to 1, and I know that between 0 and 1, children can advance massively, but generally you're looking at, from a physical perspective, a child being able to lie on the back, they can move their arms, they can move their legs, they can lift the head if they're on the tummy, and they're starting to sit. So these are the sorts of things we would be expecting. And then in terms of communication skills, making some noises, they might be laughing. If you're laughing or making funny noises at them, they might laugh back. They can respond to other people, they can look and identify somebody. They might recognise their own name, or they might start saying familiar words. It's their first word. My son's first word was our dog, Hector, because I used to get in with him in the pram and I'd be shouting at the dog, Hector, shut up, Hector. And that was my son's first name. So they're starting to recognise words that other people are saying to them. And then in terms of bathroom needs, they're going to be very dependent on other people. So an infant is going to require frequent nappy changes, and they're going to be relying on other people for bath time. So very, very dependent because of their development abilities on other people. We then start looking at moving into toddlerhood, where physically a child will be walking. They can manage stairs with supervision or support. They should be independently feeding, so they can put food to their mouths. They might not have the coordination to hold a knife and a fork, but they might be able to hold a spoon. They've got the dexterity and the fine motor skills to be able to hold small items, so play with little toys or different things, and perhaps the coordination to catch a large ball, so something comes towards them and they're able to catch. And from a communication point of view, they might be now starting to build up a bank of words. They can say quite a few things. They're starting to recognise parts of the body, and that becomes quite important when they're having a bath, for example. They can point to parts of the body, and heads, shoulders, knees and toes is always a lovely game to play with a little toddler when they're in the bath. They can follow simple commands. They might choose not to, but they have got the ability to understand what you're asking them to do. And then they're starting to put together sentences and use language correctly. And again, this is very much dependent on the environment in which they sit in. Some people will develop language much quicker than others because of how much they're communicated within their own home environment, or within nursery or wherever they might be during the day. And they can also count to 10. So that's kind of a typical milestone at this age. And then in terms of bathroom activities, this is when toddlers begin the process of learning to use the potty or the toilet. It might involve transitioning from nappies to pull-up nappies, pull-up pants. So they're using nappies that kind of imitate a pair of pants. And it's trying to encourage the child to recognise and respond to those body signals that they need to do a wee or they need to go for a poo, and understanding that. And one of the things that children do often mimic is they model themselves on parents. So when you've got a toddler particularly who might be running around the house and can't be kept on their own, if you as a parent need to go to the toilet, unless you can put them in a pen and somewhere safe, or you're doing it when they're having a nap, if you need to go to the toilet, you would generally take the child with you. So they're observing and starting to make associations with the fact that, oh, well, when mummy or daddy, whoever it might be, is going to the toilet and sitting on the toilet, they're doing a wee or they're doing a poo, and they're starting to make those associations. If you've got a child who perhaps isn't at this development stage, who perhaps isn't walking, and is maybe quite heavy to take to the toilet, it can be a lot easier for that child to be left for a couple of minutes downstairs on the floor, knowing that they can't go anywhere while you nip to the toilet for a wee. But what that stops them doing is making those observational associations between the toilet and you having a wee. So already some of the delays that a child might have physiologically or developmentally potentially could have an impact on some of these activities that become the norm for other children. They should be starting to build up their basic hand washing skills with assistance, knowing that once you've been to the toilet and you've done a wee, you wash your hands. Again, that could be an environmental influence. Not everybody does wash their hands after the toilets, but these are the sorts of things that we'd be looking to build on. And then starting to understand the concept that once you've been to the toilet, you flush the chain. So you might be using a potty. You might use a potty downstairs. Ideally, if you can use a potty in a bathroom, it's starting to build that association up. And then you'd flush the potty down the toilet, flush the chain. So they're starting to understand that association. And then we're moving into kind of that older age of preschool, where the child might be at nursery, they might be at school. They're able to climb the stairs reciprocally, so they're getting much more independent in stair climbing. They can hop, they can balance on one foot, so using things like getting in and out the bath. They might not need to be lifted into the bath. They might be able to step over the side of the bath. Using a knife and fork, they might be able to dress independently. And when I say dress independently, this is more around being able to dress physically, so physically be able to manage the items. They might not have the awareness, the emotional awareness of what they have to wear or what order they put things in. My mum was a big advocate of independent dressing when I was a baby, and she always tells me of the tale when I went to nursery, I dressed myself to go to nursery, and nursery phoned to say I've not got any pants on. So I'd done all the right things, I just missed some of the aspects out that I needed to put on. And then communication, children are becoming much more inquisitive, asking lots of questions, showing sympathy when a child is upset, another child is upset, learning to share, being much more imaginative and wanting to be more independent. So children are wanting to do these things. So the more they're seeing carers, family members using toilets, going in the bath, seeing it at school, they're wanting to do a lot more themselves independently, naturally, because of their development age. So toileting becomes much more independent. If the child is at nursery, for example, then they are encouraged to go to the toilet and manage the toileting needs themselves. As they go to school, they're expected to manage the toileting needs more independently without constant supervision. And it's at this point that they're taught how to wipe, that they can wipe themselves with supervision. Still need to be checked that they're clean, but starting to want to wipe themselves, and they should be encouraged to do so. And also what comes with that is, more importantly, the need to wash their hands. So as a child then starts to do things more independently, wiping the bottom, hand hygiene becomes much more important. So it's building on those skills of being able to make sure that they've got quite refined hand washing skills. And then we're moving through to sort of early stage of school, sort of primary school, junior school, heading towards secondary school. And personal hygiene takes much more of a priority at this age. Children start to take much more responsibility for it, perhaps starting to spend a little bit more time doing they might be in the bath, but they'll wash themselves. They might be under supervision, but they'll wash themselves independently. Or they might start using deodorant. I've got a client who's got cerebral palsy. She's 8 and she can put on a full face of makeup. She's got she's got quite a lot of involuntary movements, but she will work really hard to keep those still and put a makeup on. She's becoming very aware of her own appearance. And thinking about toilet etiquette, trying to encourage children to use disposed waste properly. Make sure you flush after yourself, doesn't always happen, but trying to encourage the social norms, if you like, of using the toilet. And then we hit adolescence. So as the young person is getting older, thinking about some of the advanced personal care routines, shaving, grooming, skincare, the sorts of things that might need to take place at this age. Menstrual hygiene. So as young women, as girls start hitting puberty, they've got to deal with their menstrual needs every month, and they may want privacy when doing these things. It becomes much more of a private area being in a bathroom. And you might hear the bathroom door being locked when your teenage child is in there, because they want that privacy. And this can be really hard for children who perhaps physiologically are meeting some of these developmental targets, these levels, who might be having periods, or might be suddenly growing bodily hair, or starting to sweat a bit more, but other areas, emotionally and emotionally they've not developed at that level. And how do you support them through these things when perhaps these things are happening to them? And how do you then give them that privacy that perhaps you would normally afford a child at this age, but they need support with managing some of these personal needs? So it can be quite a difficult time for children. So we know that for children who have got children and young people who've got additional needs or development delays, that some of these milestones aren't being met, and they do need support with them. So I want to consider one of our therapeutic models to help kind of explain that. I'm going to use the person, environment, occupation, performance model to just get thinking about some of how we address some of the needs of our clients that we work with. So if we look at occupation and think that occupation is all the different activities that we want to do, and what we're trying to do through this model is maximise occupational performance and participation. So the first thing we're going to look at is, what is this activity that this person needs to or wants to be able to do? So we would look at that occupation. I'm going to use toileting as an example, and we're going to analyse that activity. So let's think about, what do we need to be able to do when using the toilet? So if we were using the toilet just as a regular activity, at this point we're not thinking about the person. If it was me that was using the toilet, in the first instance, if we're analysing it, I need to think about, well, I need to be able to know when I need a wee or a poo. I need to be able to physically get to the toilet. I then need to be able to undress myself, take my clothes off. I need to be able to sit on the toilet. I then need to be able to go to the toilet. Then I need to clean myself. I need to be able to stand up, get my clothes back up again, and then I need to flush the toilet. And then I need to be able to wash my hands. So if we break down the activity on a very simple level, they're all the things that I need to be able to do to use the toilet. And then we start looking at, okay, then, well, what skills do we need to complete this task? So physiologically, I need some bowel and bladder control. I need the motor skills to be able to walk to the bathroom, to be able to sit on the toilet, to be able to stand at the sink to wash my hands. Cognitive skills, I need to remember where the toilet is. I need to be able to plan that route, give myself enough time to get to the toilet. And I also need a level of sensory awareness. So can I see the seat? Can I see the toilet? If I'm sitting down, have I got proprioceptive skills to know where the toilet is when I sit down, so I'm not going to miss it. And we've also got this eighth sensory skill of interoception. Do I actually know when I need the toilet? Am I getting the signals internally of being aware that I need to go to the toilet? Am I getting that message? And not all people do get that. So it's understanding that we need all these things. And I also need to have the social awareness and understanding of social norms. So I need to know that if I need to go to the toilet, I don't just go in a corner and go to the toilet. I go to the toilet. I don't do it in my nappy. If I've got a nappy on, I want to be able to go to the toilet and actually do it. Or I need to understand that it's normal to keep, normal social norms is to be able to keep clean and wear clean clothes if possible. So having all that social awareness helps then me understand some of those social norms. So then if we come back to the model, we've analysed the activity, and then we need to now think about, well, how does that match the performance of that person that we're working with? What can that person actually do? These are the this is what we've analysed. These are the skills that are needed, but what ability does that person actually have? And the challenge working with children is that you're not just working with the impairment and their strengths, but you're also working with the fact that they are growing up and they are continuing to develop. As an adult, if somebody has got a disability, an illness, or a health condition, they are at that developmental level. We know that they have met their developmental level, they've plateaued. But when we're working with children, we're working with the impairment that they've got, but we're also working with the fact that they haven't met some of those developmental stages, and we don't know whether they will. They might do, they might not. So there's lots more complexity working with children when you're trying to look at their performance levels. So to be able to help with understanding, well, what's going to influence the performance, one of the areas we're going to look at is them as an individual, all those intrinsic factors. So their physical abilities, their cognitive abilities, their sensory needs, and any behavioural challenges that they might be potentially displaying. So what makes up that person? What do we know about them? As well as, like I say, the challenges of understanding their developmental stages. And then we're also going to look at the environmental factors, the extrinsic factors. And that can be the built environment. So is the layout of the house conducive to them being able to get to the toilet? If it's at school, is the toilet area suitable? We've already spoken about that. So what does the built environment look like, and what barriers might there be to be able to participate in toilet activities? And then also the social and the cultural environment. Are they getting lots of support at home? Are they getting the attention that perhaps that they need? If they've got family members, if the parents have got 4 or 5 other children, they might not be able to spend the level of time that perhaps a child with additional needs, because they've got other children that they've got to deal with. So that could be an obstacle to them being able to perform the toileting activities. Culturally, some of the cultural environments, and interestingly, historically, from a cultural point of view, years and years ago, when we used fabric nappies, when it was terry toweling nappies rather than disposable nappies, because they would leak a lot, you could tell when you were wet. What typically would happen, children would be put on potties a lot sooner and try to build in much more of a routine of being able to go on the potty, because it meant less washing, because the nappy wasn't getting as wet. The children were able to indicate a lot sooner when they needed to go to the toilet, because they were recognising the wetness. Absorbent disposable nappies are brilliant for parents, but actually they're being quite not so conducive for potty training. So culturally, there's been changes in terms of managing toileting needs through those developmental stages, but also culturally, if you've got a family that you're working with where personal hygiene perhaps isn't a priority, and culturally they don't wash that often, that's going to be an additional barrier that you've got to work through when you're working with the child who you're perhaps wanting to really work on their toileting habits. And the economic environment, we know that statutory services don't have massive amount of money, so if the built environment isn't suitable, the economic environment might be a barrier because we don't have then the finances to be able to change the environment to make it more conducive to that individual. So when we're looking at trying to piece all of this together, we've got all these factors that will influence. It's not just about the child or the young person being able to do these activities. We've also got these other environmental factors that are going to influence their ability to perform that activity. And all of this goes into the melting pot that is our heads as occupational therapists to then plan what are the strategies that we're going to use. And the various different ways that we can do that. So we might use a restorative or a developmental approach. So for example, so this would be looking at building the skills to complete the task in what we would see as perhaps a normal way. So for example, you're working on Sam's fine motor skills that he can hold a toothbrush and brush his teeth, or you're looking at creating routines for him to go to the toilet. So that's looking at a specific approach to build skills to do that in the normal way. We might look at an adaptive approach, which is looking at an alternative method to complete or modify the task. So, for example, you suggest that Mohammed sits on the toilet for a week rather than standing. Or Olivia, you've got a brilliant hand washing routine, but she's really struggling with coordinating using soap. So you're going to use a soap dispenser for that element of the routine. You're just adapting what you would do for that task. And then a compensatory approach. This is a way of using a strategy to compensate for the impairment. So you're not doing it in a normal way. You would do it in a different way that compensates for the impairment. So, for example, a wash-dry toilet. Bodhi can't clean himself, can't wipe, can't use the toilet roll. And therefore it's much more appropriate for him to use a wash-dry toilet. So you're taking away the requirement to actually do it. Or, for example, Lewis can't stand in the shower, so you're going to provide a shower chair. So we have all these different approaches that we use, and often we use a real mix of all three of them, depending on the needs of the client. We interchange, don't we? And I just briefly want to look at nappies as being used as a compensatory approach. So nappies is an example of an approach. Rather than taking somebody to the toilet, a nappy is used because it's easier. And the Bladder and Bowel UK have produced this document which essentially says that we shouldn't be using nappies for children with learning or other disabilities that potentially could delay the acquisition of toileting skills unless they've had at least 6 months supported toilet skill development. So it shouldn't be the go-to. We should be trying to support children to develop their toileting skills and abilities before we use nappies. Nappies should be the last resort. We should be looking at it. We should be looking at. And then I'll just talk quickly about grading. We grade children's activities when it comes to toileting all the time anyway, don't we? We go from potties to we've got potties that look like toilets to start that association. We then can use booster seats on toilets. Some have got steps. We might use a portable potty. So we're not relying on nappies when we're out. If a child wants to go to the toilet, my great nephews call it code brown, and we've got to get the potty out because we're encouraging them to sit on something rather than using a nappy. So we're already grading. Sometimes we'll grade up, sometimes we'll grade down. We're already using a graded approach. And it's encouraging that with children who perhaps have got additional needs or development needs. And using mainstream equipment like this is brilliant. We don't need any specialist equipment particularly. And I'm not going to talk about this document. I would just encourage you to look at it. This was something that was developed by Continence Foundation of Australia that Bladder and Bowel UK have adopted and promote as a way of supporting parents to help develop toileting skills for children with special needs. So it's a stepped approach. I haven't got time to go through it because I'm very mindful of time, but I would definitely encourage you to have a look at that as a guide for OTs, but certainly a guide for parents. And then just finally, thinking about future proofing and age appropriateness. And now I'm a housing OT, so I'm always going to be really looking at this from a compensatory approach. So thinking about bathroom design and thinking about, as we are moving from a young child through to getting older as a teenager, eventually becoming an adult, thinking about the adjustability to accommodate change. So thinking about, will that bathroom be suitable for somebody later on as they are getting older? Can you look at height adjustable toilet, for example, or a toilet that can be adjusted in height? Will it be suitable? Do you need to look at a bath that will meet the needs of an adult as well as a child? So it's always, particularly when it comes to public funding, we've always got to think about long-term planning as well as the immediate needs. Without disabling the child anymore, we've also got to think very pragmatically. Children are going to grow. Also thinking about safety, behavioural changes. If you've got a young child who's got behaviour challenges now, or perhaps displays behavioural distress, as they're getting older, that behaviour might improve, but it also might get worse. So thinking about some of the things in terms of safety when we're thinking about design of bathrooms. And then more from a support point of view, is about the appropriateness and the level of support that is provided. I mentioned earlier, when children and adolescents are starting to become go through puberty, what happens then? I had it was an adult, she was a young adult, 18, she was very, very disabled cognitively and physically. So from a developmental point of view, she was very young, but she was obviously, she'd gone through maturity and she was having periods, and her dad was taking care of her personal needs when it came to managing her menstrual care. And so we had to involve the whole team to talk about, is this appropriate? Does she understand what is happening? And he wasn't doing it through any appropriateness. That's his role as a dad, but it was whether that was appropriate at that age to be dealing with that sort of personal care. And so we worked closely with a psychologist to help her understand, the client understand, did she want her dad to be doing that? And she said she'd prefer not to. She'd prefer the paid carers to be doing that. So it's just thinking about the appropriateness of supporting families around what is age appropriate for those particular toileting activities. So on my final slide, that's me finished, is really just to point you in the direction of this document, which I got quite a lot of information from. It's a really useful document that was produced last year by, in conjunction with Bladder and Bowel UK and Down Syndrome UK, around supporting people with additional needs with developmental delays around the occupation of toileting. And what is best practice, and certainly I would encourage you to look at that. So thank you very much, and any questions?